Hello and welcome. Today's presentation is about the AMDRAS professional domains and the AMDRAS standards. I've got a little bit of an overview of the standards. This is the new AMDRAS website. Not everything has come across as yet. It's still in the process of moving over from the NMAS or NEMAS, depending on your background, which was the National Mediator Accreditation System. And now we're just transitioning, and except for those that have already started training under the NMAS and haven't finished, everyone will be working under AMDRAS from the 30th or from the 1st of July, 2025. Now, if you go to the AMDRAS website, it has the document, which is the standards, Australian Mediator and Dispute Resolution Accreditation Standards, and that's the basic outline of the structure. It's got a lot more information than was previously there around the expectations for mediators. There's still a fair bit of flexibility for variations in practice. It's certainly a lot bigger document than the previous system. So the key focus areas are these four professional practice domains: professional knowledge, professional skills, how we apply that knowledge, professional ethics and responsibilities, and there's now a code of practice for mediators, where before it was articulated in the system, and professional development obligations. So I do actually have a slide that's relevant for you as well, whenever level you're at. So the training and assessment, so there's now a requirement for a certificate of training and then the certificate of assessment. And you've got that time to apply after completing the certificate of assessment to be nationally accredited.
Joanne, we lost you for a second there. How long is it?
It's generally 6 months from your certificate of assessment you need to apply. And for the application, you need good character requirements. Generally, it's 2 written references, but if you've passed good character under another system that might be relevant, you could apply that. So if someone was admitted to legal practice, we might be able to use that as evidence. You have to disclose any disqualifications from professional practice, and that's whether it's as a mediator or anything else. And this is an ongoing obligation. So if something changes throughout your career, you do need to notify and disclose. Criminal convictions, particularly if they relate to dishonesty or violence. Any impairment, I've never really understood what the impairment might be, but if there's an impairment that may affect your ability to provide services, or if you've had an accreditation cancellation or suspension. So you can't be suspended by one accrediting body and then go somewhere else and not disclose it. So any disqualifications and accreditation suspension. There's a fee that's collected by your accrediting body and paid to the AMDRAS board. So that's, at the moment, it's $100. And you have to have an organisation that does your independent complaint handling. So Mediation Institute provides that, and we charge $190 per year for practitioner membership. For accreditation through Mediation Institute, it's $480 for 2 years, which is the period of time that you're accredited under the AMDRAS. With the complaint handling, that covers if people are also family dispute resolution practitioners or family group conference facilitators. The other thing that you have to have is professional indemnity insurance. You can get that as a standalone policy unless you're working in a dispute settlement centre. You'd be covered there by them, but if you're doing private practice, you have to have your own insurance. And then renewals every 2 years. And yes, we've just put an arrangement in place with Aon, who's providing a pretty reasonably priced policy for my members. We don't get any kickbacks. Some of it's just for the convenience. There's Rose put a link there in the chat. And if you're just watching this on recording, if you go to the mediationinstitute.edu.au website and just search for Aon, AON, you should get that post to come up. So CPD requirements, so continuing professional development requirements for all levels of accreditation, is 25 hours every 2 years. And we'll just look at the categories in a moment. Practice hours, what's new with AMDRAS is that there's levels of accreditation. So initial accreditation is as an accredited mediator, and your practice hour requirements are 20 hours over 2 years. People that have been accredited for 4 or more years and undertake a practicum or an alternative pathway. So it's a reflective practice. It's a 12-hour workshop type course. They can apply for advanced mediator. And then if they've been advanced for 6 years, they may be able to apply for leading mediator. Now, clearly we don't want to wait in the system for 10 years for that to be able to happen. So there are alternative pathways. We're just waiting for the board to approve our proposed pathway, and then we'll let members know about the process to apply if you are a more experienced mediator. There's also going to now be specialist dispute resolution practitioner categories. And again, that's by application, and it needs to be distinct enough from general mediation to be recognised. The first application that's been submitted is for elder mediation, and that's close to approval. So that looks like that will be the first specialisation that people can have. And there's also the provision for very long-serving mediators who have been in the sector for a long time but maybe aren't mediating as much. There'll be an honorary leading mediator category that provides that recognition. So before I go on to the next one, any questions or comments about that? It's all pretty self-explanatory. On the other infographic on that screen, you'll see the more detail about those renewal requirements. So the work as a mediator, it can be as a co-mediator, and up to 5 hours of that 20 hours can be pre-mediation, and up to 5 hours can be observing a more experienced practitioner. So it's not an incredibly high bar to get over.
And what happens if you don't meet the criteria?
Generally, you'll need to be reassessed, and there's cost to that to show that you're still competent. So best if you do. We've got a webinar, is it tomorrow?
On the volunteer one, yeah.
On the
volunteer one.
Yeah, looking at volunteering as a mediator as a way to get those first couple of mediations under your belt if you're not already in a situation where you'll be able to get that experience on the job or elsewhere. There are categories. So the 25 hours of professional development every 2 years. We run a lot of CPD that's free for members, so there shouldn't really be a reason not to be able to get that. You can also claim up to 4 hours by role playing for other mediators once you're accredited, if you come back and role play related CPD. So if, for example, Bob, if you're working in the building industry as a mediator, then CPD related to building, you could claim up to 5 hours of that, change to legislation and other things that may affect.
I suppose that I could pull across some of the CPD for legal practice.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, particularly around ethics and legislative frameworks and things like that. And you can do up to 5 hours of self-directed learning. These days with AI, you can say, AI, give me 5 hours of self-directed learning, and it'll probably come up with that. Yeah. So we've also, in the members area, there's a whole pile of recorded videos as well and webinars. So you can...
And you can present a webinar as well.
Yeah, and absolutely.
So that gives you 3 points.
Someone like Sharon with huge experience.
Yeah.
I'd like to present on something. And you get 3 hours of CPD credits for 1 hour presentation. That's a good way to do it. And with the evidence of CPD, it can be audited. So it's good to keep a record in the members area. If you attend events, it'll semi-automatically record that you've attended. So that's evidence, but you can also upload and record other activities that you do. Any questions or comments? So I thought we'd just do a little quick overview of these. It's by far too much detail on this presentation to go into it all. I think it'd be really useful if, as we're going through, if there's any areas that you particularly want to zone in on, then we can. Otherwise, we'll just move through. But as far as the professional knowledge is concerned, these are the domains. So understanding conflict and the way people behave when they're in conflict, We've got a webinar tomorrow at lunchtime, and for those on their course or our AMDRAS students, there's a lot of information in the course about various models and ways of looking at conflict and how people behave. So understanding the factors that play a role in conflict and dispute resolution, knowledge and principles of the models for resolution, and roles and functions of participants. So we don't do a full-on simulation with support people and all of the others that could be there. That would be fun, and we could do that as a PD perhaps down the track. But in the mediation role plays that you do in training, it's just the two clients and the mediator. But we talk about some of the variations that can happen. Knowledge of a range of strategies for resolving conflicts and when to use them. Some of the skills or approaches you use differently depending on what stage of the mediation you're in, and also how the parties are behaving and reacting. And you need to know about the need for fairness, safety and protection against misuse of the mediation process. And that understanding of ethics, professional and legal obligations is a really important one for us as mediators. And understanding the limitations on the scope and type of guidance or advice that can be offered by resident practitioners. And so I'm not going to go through this in detail, but you can have access to the slides and have a look more if you want to. If there's anything that you particularly have questions about, please let me know, or we'll have an opportunity later in the week to discuss. But as I said, there'll be more work on some of these models. And the next one is the skills, so the professional skills attributes. And again, there's a whole pile of different, quite overlapping skills. So being able to conduct an initial assessment to determine if a matter is appropriate for dispute resolution. So with the AMDRAS course, we'll be working on that in week 3. Providing support for agency, self-determination, co-determination, cooperative informed decision-making. So that really looking at the empowerment of clients in this process. Now, we're talking about this as facilitative mediation, which is, I suppose, the core skill set for mediators. But there are other ways that people mediate, but it needs to be done with client permission and knowledge if you're going to be using a different style of mediation. So facilitating a fair process, so that comes into bias and also avoidance of conflict of interest, managing the process. So one of the things we say is that the parties own the issues and we, as the mediators, we own the process. It's our job to make sure that we are facilitating the process that we've told people that we're going to be facilitating, and rather than letting it disintegrate into something that's not mediation. Supporting the parties, so maintaining a fair process, but also supporting people in the process so that they're able to communicate and read and participate regardless of their individual characteristics. And then from that, managing the risks to fairness, safety and abusive process. So that how they link to the previous knowledge things. We need to know about those things and then we need to apply them in our ethical, professional, legal obligations.
Is it a common rule to have people agree in good faith they're going to mediate, and then on mediation, one party diverts from that entirely?
There's certainly common for them to try to do that. Yeah. And whether it's dominating the airtime, sometimes people think if they're talking, or it could be just their personality. Some people talk a lot and don't allow the other one to get time in. Sometimes it can be attempts to misuse the process in other ways. So yeah, that's the sort of thing that we need to be aware of as a mediator and managing. So again, there's a whole lot of practical information that we need to provide and also need to determine about suitability. Often it relates to how much conflict's been present and whether people are going to be able to speak freely, particularly those in that return to work sphere and some of those other where there may be certain vulnerabilities. That whole concept of self-determination is really important. And here's how the standards articulate what's a fair process. So being able to communicate, exchange information, identify and clarify, explore interests. So interests, often we find when people present to us in mediation, they come with positions. So their demands or their claims or what their legal advice has told them that they should ask for. And our role is to try and understand why that is important to them, what's underlying that need, because there are often things that can be satisfied in a lot of different ways. And so that kind of pulls apart the conflict and provides a way forward that just wouldn't be there if people are arguing about, I want this and I want that. And that helping people to consider alternatives, because an element of conflict is that people become very fixed in their thinking. It's a natural part of being in conflict, but we need to reverse that, because unless they can think about alternatives, we're not going to shift anything from where they came to us.
I could just see a circumstance where you had maybe somebody that was genuinely to try and resolve something, and the other party was surly, combative, and that agree they want to take part. Their behaviour says otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. So things like ground rules for behaviour, they're important to be set and upheld. But the pre-mediation is really, it's not just a formality. It's really, if we do a really good job with the pre-mediation, it can often head off some of those issues, because why are they being surly? Why are they being like that? If they haven't had much of a preparation and they think it's all a waste of time, yeah, of course they're going to act like that, because first. So yeah, there's a fair bit in understanding why they're there, and you can't always, sometimes you do end up with that. And in private sessions, you can sometimes take them to the side and do a bit of reality testing. Can't reach agreement here. What's going to happen? What's the best case? What's the worst case scenario? Yeah, which can often do a little bit of an attitude check. And yeah, so generally as mediators, we provide procedural advice, but we refer them to other sources for real specific individual advice, just to make sure that we do maintain a fair process. The other thing is to make sure that people understand that they can stop the mediation, particularly if they're in a situation where they've been ordered to come to mediation. They do always have that right to leave. So there's a whole pile of little elements, and yeah, that element about good faith and making sure that people are behaving in an appropriate way. Support parties to participate in the process, making sure that we make it a fair and equitable process, managing risks to fairness, safety and abuse of process, maintaining our ethical, professional and legal obligations. So it depends on what context that you're working. A lot of mediators actually work in conciliation type roles, building disputes, Fair Work Commission, Human Rights Commission. All of them have mediators working in, but they're in the context of specific legislation where they may be providing more guidance around that. Particularly for those that are lawyers and others that are used to providing advice, there is a form of mediation that's advisory or evaluative mediation, but you still need to be really mindful of those obligations regarding maintaining a fair process. If that's the sort of mediation that you're interested in, it's still important to obtain consent from the participants to use that process. So I would make it very clear in your agreement to mediate, and every mediator should be providing an agreement to mediate, which outlines your obligations to the parties and their expectations, and get them to sign that. It's very, very unhelpful if I get a complaint, because I do manage our complaint handling and that hasn't been done. It puts the mediator in a very poor position.
You got to outline before and then completely dropped out.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so you should use an agreement to mediate that very clearly outlines the style of mediation you're going to be doing and all of your obligations to the parties. That's really it. Is it expected thing in mediation, and it also is very important and protective for you if you do have a complaint and you've got nothing to show of what you've to do. And certainly if you're wanting to be on that advisory or evaluative end of the spectrum. So if you're doing that, your agreement to mediate should obtain consent for the participants to use the process, ensure that it's within the professional area, that the advice is being given, that you have current knowledge, skills and experience, that you hold professional registration, membership or statutory employment. If you're in a conciliation role, for example, if you're wanting to provide advice, you better make sure your professional indemnity insurance provider knows that, and you may find that your premiums are a bit higher, and ensure that the advice is provided in a manner that maintains and respects the principles of self-determination and co-determination. So that isn't always done, and those that have experience participating in mediation will have seen examples, I'm sure, of where mediation's been provided in a way that undermines self-determination, and that's dangerous. Don't do it. And when we're reality testing, so reality testing is one of the skills that we have as a mediator to help people not to get carried along with their agreements and really think about how they may be implemented. And we need to do that in a way that doesn't undermine self-determination. For example, not projecting our personal biases onto the situation, or undermine people's ability to seek advice or support for their decision making. And we need to use it fairly between the parties, so we don't, again, display a bias by reality testing really harshly with one and letting the other person's proposals just sit there with our tacit agreement. And we need to make sure that we've got sound contextual knowledge of what's going on if we're trying to provide any guidance around the reality of what they're proposing. Any thoughts or questions on that? So there's a little bit more information about pre-mediations. That's, again, it's skills that we should have. More details on supporting agency. So there's, as I said, a fair bit of guidance in the standards. Again, professional ethics and responsibilities overlapping skills, and these are the ethics. Among them are having feedback and complaints mechanism and meeting your obligations. And as I said, there's a set of ethical responsibilities and there's a code of ethics that kind of interrelate, but in some cases provide a little bit more information. It's really important for you to review the standards against your practice and just make sure that, for example, your agreement to mediate and all of those are up to date, referencing appropriately. As a mediator, one of your obligations is to provide people with a clear and accessible way to make a complaint if they're not satisfied. So ideally, encourage feedback so that you can sort out any issues at your level, but you do need to provide a way for them so that they can make a complaint to your complaint handling body if necessary. It's much worse if they have to come to their board to try and find out who your complaint handling body is because you didn't provide it, because then you've got a grievance as well as a complaint. Support for agency and self-determination. There's a lot of ethical obligations around that. Also around confidentiality. So making sure that we protect confidential information.
One question, Joey, on confidentiality.
Yep.
I'm assuming that the information discussed in mediation is confidential, but I wouldn't attract privilege.
No, not necessarily. There's a strong convention that mediation's confidential, and I encourage mediators to use agreement to mediate where people are contracting to say they're going to keep the mediation confidential as well, which gives extra weight to the common law expectation. So there is some protections in the Evidence Act as well that some mediators have huge confidence in, but sometimes subpoenaing that happens. Depends on your context. But yeah, basically we should be saying we must be keeping it confidential and not using anything that we learn for personal gain or anything like that. But yeah, use an agreement to mediate where parties indicate that they won't be using the information.
So is it a feasible possibility that discussions, mediation could be used in evidence?
It should not be accepted. Yeah, it would be very unusual for it to be accepted. If they reach an agreement, particularly if they sign it, then yes, that generally would immediately be available for evidence of that agreement. Again, how the court considers it and whether they choose to enforce it, up to the court. All those even-handed approaches. Representing services ethically. Now, this is an area where we've had some issues where someone was nationally accredited and they taking on cases that related to family law and then when it fell apart, the party's asking for a Section 60I certificate, which of course they're not able to issue. So what we're recommending, and we've got a sample agreement to mediate, is that you positively indicate that you're not a family dispute resolution practitioner, if you're not, so that it's very clear that's where the scope of your work is as well. It's also highly unethical for mediators to have conditional fees. You pay me if we get an outcome and you don't have to pay me if we don't. That would be very improper because then it creates a conflict of interest where you've got a personal benefit in them getting an outcome, which could result in you putting undue pressure. Your fees should be very clearly articulated in advance. Known to all. Generally, mediators, we charge in advance because, again, it's not conditional on an outcome, and usually you charge for the pre-mediation phase and not the mediation, just depending on the circumstances. If you're working, let's say, a workplace is paying, they'll often pay for the whole process because there's already been some pre-work about whether or not people are going to participate. Any questions about that, representing yourself? If you're a brand new national accredited mediator, you can't say that you've got 20 years experience as a mediator. You can say you've got 20 years experience in the building industry or whatever, and now you're qualified as a mediator, but it would be very problematic ethically if you're misrepresenting your experience as a mediator. Oh, yeah, the other one is also creating false expectations of a favourable result. So we definitely can't guarantee outcomes. We control the process. The parties control whether or not they reach agreement. And yeah, there's even more about that. There's quite a lot of information in there, overlapping, looking at it from the knowledge, the provision of services, the ethical obligations, and the professional developments are reflective practice. So talking about case type things. We run a monthly group supervision, a peer group supervision, so you can bring cases to that and engage in that. Professional learning, we looked at those as well. And then as you advance in experience, contributing to the field through leadership, mentoring and supervision. So providing that support for newer mediators. Yes, I'm sorry there was very much information there. Didn't go through it all, but that's the reality of the new standards. They've got a lot more there. Sharon, you'd be very familiar with the old AMDRAS. Yeah, it's expanded for the benefit of those that are new. It was a very long and drawn out process to go from the old standards to the new one. There was a survey and research, and then COVID came and it slowed the whole process down. So it's taken a lot. I think it's 6 years for a 2-year process. But it's been a lot of work. I'm actually on the standards board, so I can promise you there has been a lot of work in the background to bring it to this stage. So thoughts, comments, too much information. We'll be applying it for those of you that are learning the process. So really looking at it, but you can see like the focus as a mediator, particularly as a facilitative mediator, but even if you are doing evaluative style mediation, is in mediation, the parties choose what they're going to agree to or not. And anything that undermines that is you're risking your ethical conduct.
Are there templates somewhere on the website? I haven't had a good look yet.
For
pre-mediation, just examples of how they can be set out, just to make sure all the boxes are ticked.
Like your agreement to mediate, but we have got a sample agreement to mediate that ticks all those boxes. That's
I
another.
need to update some of my templates and things.
Yeah, and checking your intake dockets as well, and make sure that you're covering off on that. The expectations that we should be referring people if there's areas outside our scope.
And the problem with that is that it would be good to, when I get a new phone, it'd be good to have something like that on my phone, because often people ring you back when you're out and about and you've got to find a private place, and it's not always in the office.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And look, practice has changed a lot since COVID. It's much less common that mediators have a fixed office location in a building. When I first started out, I co-located with my husband, who's a lawyer, and I had a mediation practice. Clients had come to their building and we'd do the mediation in there and have our breakout rooms and all of that. But now I work fully online. And so it's changed a fair bit. We need to be mindful about our obligations about when we talk about confidentiality. It's also about the documentation and paperwork. If people are sending us through information, we need to be really thinking about not was doing, I can pray with someone and I said, oh, where's your thing? Oh, the kids have drawn on it. And I was like, oh. You should be, if you're having hard copies of things, they should be in a locked filing cabinet, even if it's a home office.
A shredder.
And a shredder, yes, definitely have a shredder. Load across the shredder and find you behind me. We've got to really be thinking about not just saying that we're doing these things, we've got to think about how do we do these things, like maintaining that confidential information. It's more challenging these days because of it's all those very smart, very busy people out there trying to steal people's data and information. Yeah, thinking about we're in the service I run, we're using a mediation as our practice management software. So we're using that for case management and that sort of thing.
Which is what I was talking to you about today, Sharon.
Yeah, is there like a example of you look at it?
Just
Sorry.
contact. They do a demo. You can.
Who does the demo?
It's
Yeah.
We've got a how-to on the My Members as well.
The My Members is that software.
Which Sharon's joined up today, so.
Oh, welcome, Sharon. Yeah, so we're using it. Actually, that's where I was thinking to put the example documents, because it's got a library in there that's a little bit more friendly than Mission. Yeah, you'll be able to access those there. You can actually set up a dummy case and have a little play in there, because it's not intended for client use. Any other questions? I know I've bombarded you with information. For you, Robert, it's in the course, there's a little bit more detail, and then we'll be working through the various models and that sort of thing to understand the weird ways that people behave in conflict. Sometimes we get them and we think, oh, everyone must be horrible, but they're probably not horrible. They're just...
So, like, having worked structured for so long, I see a lot of conflict in that. So, pretty, let's just say it's not refined.
No, it's not refined. And look, a lot of people are conflict avoidant. And so rather than having the hard conversation, they leave it till it boils over, and then you end up in the magistrate's court or somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's very much what we want to try and avoid. The other thing to think about is, as a mediator, there's things like little information sessions or little guidance training and things that you can provide into a sector that you know about. And that can be a really good way to make yourself, oh, he's the guy that does that conflict stuff. So as you're thinking about building your practice, because mediation's an intervention, whereas sometimes there's work that's needed after the intervention because things need to get put back together. You can build a more sustainable practice that way, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. The other thing in the members area, which you should have access to as a student.
There's a student form at the bottom of the Join MI. I can add you.
Yeah.
I can activate that.
Yeah.
I'll send this form. I'll put this form here.
Yeah. And if you
Wait it.
Yeah, that's great, because there's some past practice development webinars. We usually run one of them once a month as well, just for those that are setting up their own practice to think about things, the stuff that Sharon's thinking about, getting her forms all updated and lined up and ready and generally standard emails and that sort of thing makes it all a lot simpler.
And updating your LinkedIn profile as well is one of the things.
Oh, yes. Yes.
You had
What was that webinar called?
It is called, I'll see if it's available. Oh, it's through Vimeo. It's like a year old, but
Go on, and you might have to look at keep top. But LinkedIn's really important. It's still massive and used very much to credential people. So people will often check you out.
Okay, thanks.
it's all right.
Okay. Hopefully, I'm not sure what stuck of that, but ethics are important because we do have that complaint handling and we don't want to have complaints. We want people to be very happy with your work and tell their friends and their friends to come and ask you to help them sort things out as well. The best way it works.